We also want to hear an example of a concern that the administration is seeking to turn education-focused programs into ones that focus on workforce development pathways. So let me be clear, the administration's decisions to transfer programs to the Department of Labor is not a routine bureaucratic reorganization. It's part of a deliberate campaign to weaken public education infrastructure and erode Congress's intent on how programs are administered. For decades, adult education and family literacy programs have been housed at the Department of Education for a reason. These programs don't simply train someone for one job. They help adults learn to read, write, improve math skills, learn English, earn a GED, and build the foundational skills needed to adapt to economic changes around them. And so, yes, workforce development matters, but adult education is about more than preparing someone for their next job. It's about building long-term capabilities and lifetime learning. In short, these critical programs are educational missions with lifelong value. Stakeholders such as the Association for Career and Technical Education are ringing the alarm bells about the decision to move adult education programs to the Department of Labor. In a recent statement, they wrote that these actions will have far-reaching negative impacts on CTE programs and learners across the country, rather than creating innovative and process improvements within CTE. This action would instead create confusion and produce new administrative inefficiencies as outlined in the IAA. The Congress has the obligation to ask the questions before these decisions have real consequences for working parents, veterans, immigrants, displaced workers, and adults seeking a second chance through education. Now, oversight matters, accountability matters, and protecting educational opportunity matters. And this is why it's so important to protect our educational programs, to ensure that they are being implemented in ways that they were envisioned. But today we'll hear how the recent grant application for the TRIO program's Talent Search and Educational Opportunities Centers are shifting their focus away from the program's historic focus on education and towards workforce development. And while it's important to ensure that students have access to all types of opportunities, government should not suddenly change the focus of a program that has been successfully serving students in communities for decades. Further, we'll hear about the ways that moving the administration of TRIO from the Department of Education to the Department of Labor harms that program. So today's briefing is an opportunity to examine ways of the administration's actions, to examine the ways administrative actions are impacting students, providers, states, workers, and communities across the country. And so I want to thank our experts for being with us today and ask them to make their comments, starting with Rachel Gittleman, local AFGE president for the Department of Education's union staff.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Scott, for holding this important briefing, and to each of you for fighting to protect the Department of Education. American Federation of Government Employees Local 252 represents more than 2,000 ed employees unlawfully fired, retired, and still fighting. My name is Rachel Gittleman, and I worked in the Ombudsman's Office of Federal Student Aid. My job was to help student loan borrowers navigate an overly complicated and dysfunctional system. I was unlawfully fired in March of 2025 with nearly 1,400 of my colleagues. I couldn't sit by and do nothing, which is why I'm helping lead the fight to protect our agency, our jobs, and our education system, most recently as union president. Ed is the smallest cabinet-level agency with just over 4,000 staff before January 2025, who managed an impressive workload on a very tight budget. But we didn't let that stop us. The department is responsible for administering roughly $150 billion in grant funding across every level of education and every part of the system. Many of our flagship programs, like the ones we're here to discuss today, focus on helping and protecting those traditionally underserved by education, including students of color, low-income students, students with disabilities, rural students, English learners, first-generation students, veteran students, and adult learners, to name a few. Since January 2025, the department has canceled or reallocated billions of dollars in grants for everything from student mental health to special education teacher training. In March 2025, nearly half of the agency was unlawfully fired or forced out. And then in October, nearly 500 additional staff were given layoff notices, which would have effectively closed the offices of K-12, special ed, civil rights, and post-secondary education. These firings were thankfully paused by the courts and then halted by Congress. Thank you all. But in the wake of the government reopening, the department announced 6 interagency agreements, or IAAs, that will ostensibly shutter most of these offices at Ed. Since then, the agency has announced 14 interagency agreements in total, selling the department off for parts to 6 different federal agencies. Now, the Department of Labor will run nearly all K-12 programs, including Title I, as well as career technical and adult ed and post-secondary education programs that help first-generation and low-income students, veterans, and students with disabilities get prepared to go to college. A program that provides on-campus childcare support for parents enrolled at more than 250 colleges across the country has moved to the Department of Health and Human Services, along with all special ed, rehabilitative services, and certain K-12 programs, including Promise Neighborhoods and school safety programs focused on getting doors and windows put in at schools. These programs will now be run by a man who believes that vaccines and Tylenol cause autism. Another interagency agreement moves Fulbright and other congressionally mandated foreign language programs to the State Department, which has seen its own mass firings and chaos. Ed staff that worked exclusively on those programs were fired last year, and now the programs will be run by a mix of contractors and some full-time staff at an agency with no expertise in education. The Department of Justice, another agency that is a shell of what it once was, has been tasked with enforcing civil rights, parental rights, and student privacy rights. And the Treasury Department, an agency that has no experience with collecting individual loans, has been saddled with the $1.6 trillion federal student debt system and the FAFSA and oversight of Title IV recipients. Finally, the Bureau of Indian Education is set to receive all Native American education programs, many of which Congress initially gave to the Department of Education because BIE lacks the authority to administer them. This IAA would ostensibly shutter many programs benefiting Alaskan and Hawaiian Native students. Make no mistake, this is not about efficiency. It's about fulfilling a campaign promise to close the Department of Education. Scattering programs across 6 federal agencies does not streamline government. It breaks it. As state and local leaders, as well as everyone on this call will tell you, this means way more red tape for them, not less. It also means frustration for the staff that administer these programs, who are steeped in experience and passion for the work that they do. Labor and HHS will receive the majority of ED's funding programs, including most formula funds, special ed, K-12, post-secondary, and career, technical, and adult education programs through a variety of IAAs. You may ask what skills, expertise, and knowledge Labor and HHS have that would lead to the success of education programs. In short, none. Not all government funding is alike. The standards and systems used by Ed, Labor, and HHS are fundamentally different. The Labor Department simply lacks the systems and expertise necessary to administer these programs. Plus, using Labor and HHS's grants management systems will cost double what it costs Ed to administer programs, diverting precious resources from schools and students who desperately need them. Despite what the secretary says, they've already fumbled implementing career technical and adult ed programs moved to Labor last fall, which I'm sure you'll hear more about. In fact, Labor was more than 2 months late in getting Perkins funds out the door, and that was for a formula program that only migrated to one of Labor's 2 grant management systems. We anticipate similar delays and issues for all discretionary grants with new competitions during FY26, including multiple TRIO programs, literacy programs, school safety programs, and migrant education programs. Then, in October of this year, the department plans to move the remainder of formula funds to Labor, changing the process for states and grant specialists in the middle of the funding process. These IAAs duplicate most processes, leading to greater, not less, bureaucracy for both grantees and staff. States, districts, and institutions face conflicting rules, multiple systems, and no one to answer the phone with their pressing questions. With delays imminent, grantees fear that federal dollars may lapse before reaching students. The administration says these interagency agreements will return education back to the states, but only about 13% of funding for public K-12 schools comes from the federal level. That's even less for post-secondary schools. Education is already run by the states. These talking points are clearly just a smokescreen for their actual goal, closing the Department of Education. And behind every dollar slashed and office relocated is a story of a real student who is not being served right now. A child with disabilities who cannot access his school playground because he uses a walker, and his Office for Civil Rights Complaints sits in a backlog of tens of thousands of complaints. A rural student whose underfunded community overwhelmingly depends on dwindling federal funding that will be delayed because of these moves. A Title I middle school math teacher who no longer gets the on-the-job training she needs because the department canceled that funding. And a first-generation college student that no longer will have access to grants, training programs, and job opportunities because this administration changed those into block grants. The Trump administration has shown it will stop at nothing, including ignoring court orders, violating federal law, and ignoring all of you to dismantle the department and undermine the careers of thousands of dedicated public servants who work every day to support students and families across the country. I believe deeply in the idea that government can and should serve the people of this nation. But beyond that, every member of our union is a person who has been impacted and served by the programs and services we administer. We will continue to fight like hell to serve our students and protect what our agency stands for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Amy Lloyd is the CEO of All to Ed.
Ranking Member Scott and other members of the committee, thank you so much. As you just mentioned, I'm Dr. Amy Lloyd. I'm the president and CEO of All for Ed, which is a national nonprofit that drives transformation and education to career systems so that every single young person in our country thrives in learning, work, and life. And in the Biden-Harris administration, I was the Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary for Career, Technical, and Adult Education, known as OCTAE, leading a $2 billion portfolio that serves nearly 12 million CTE students and 1.3 million adult learners. So when I describe what moving OCTAE to labor is doing, I'm not just speculating on this. I ran that office, and I have 3 points to make today and 3 asks of you. So first of all, and Ranking Member Scott, you hit on this in your opening, career and technical education is education. It is not just workforce training. And the interagency agreement that is now in place and the bill that was introduced late last week to permanently move OCTAE and the Perkins Act to labor both rest on one premise, and that's that CTE is workforce development, so it belongs at the workforce agency. And that premise is wrong. Every CTE educator and every CTE student knows it and lives it. CTE, career and technical education, is delivered by licensed educators. It's grounded in academic standards. It starts as early as 5th grade for our students. It spans secondary and post-secondary education, and it propels our students to and through college. And 85% of American high school graduates take at least one CTE course. So this isn't just a niche program for other people's kids. This is a core for our mainstream American high school experience for all of our kids. And the Department of Labor's mission matters. It helps people with barriers to employment. It helps dislocated workers and disconnected youth. But it is so distinct from education's developmental work. And even moving CTE to Department of Labor, never mind all the other K-12 and higher education programs, but moving CTE alone to labor tells our young people that they're being prepared to fill today's vacancies, not to lead tomorrow's industries. And it risks recreating a tracking system that determines who is college material and who should go straight to work, taking choices out of the hands of students and parents. We don't want to go backwards and recreating kind of the stigma of a tracking system of yestercentury. We want to continue to stand on the strength of CTE leading into the future. So second of all, the so-called proof of concept for this interagency agreement has already failed. And I want to share one slide to that end. And forgive me for 1 second while I do this. Here we go. There we go. So the Secretary called the OCTAE interagency agreement a quote-unquote proof of concept for the other 13 interagency agreements to follow. But here's what it proved. Before the transfer, we had one agency and one system. And now we have two agencies working with Octave, four systems that grantees must use. So we've got G5 at Education, Grant Solutions at Labor, Health and Human Services Payment Management System, and grants.gov. And the results are deep challenges across the board for states and other grantees. Under the Defend the Spend from DOGE, states have submitted nearly 5,000 payment requests to the Department of Labor, each of those requiring time to create a written justification to draw down money that Congress has already appropriated. And as of December 5th, the day that the departments were celebrating successful implementation of this interagency agreement, only 43 out of 53 states and territories had actually drawn down their funds. And one state had fronted $22 million of its own money just to keep their programs running. And education is still spending $13 million a year on a payment system that is now duplicated by two other systems at Labor. Labor wants $9 million to hire 26 people to run Octave programs. And you don't just spend $9 million rebuilding expertise that you just threw away. So we think about this as increasing bureaucracy, not lessening it. And this impact lands on our school districts, states, and taxpayers. And third, codifying an illegal act does not make it legal. It makes it permanent. And I want to make sure to lift up Section 512 of the Bipartisan Labor HHS Ed Appropriations Law, which bars transferring appropriated funds to other agencies without explicit authority. And this administration never sought that authority. So we have to ask ourselves why these bills that were just introduced exist. You don't codify a lawful action. You codify one that you're afraid a court will undo. And also to your point, sir, you do it through 10 different bills as opposed to one large one. And as Assistant Secretary, I had to give Congress 90 days notice to reclassify two job descriptions that only changed their core focus of work a little bit. But now an entire office, its statutory duties, its staff, its billions of dollars that are flowing into your districts, the entirety of it was moved with no notice, no input, no hearing, no vote. So my three asks of you today: first, I would demand the facts before any vote. This week, I joined 6 former Octave leaders and Rachel with AFGE Local 252 in writing a letter to the Acting Inspector General to request an investigation into what this interagency agreement with Octave has cost, the waste and the duplication that it created, how our states and grantees are impacted by it, and who's now accountable for the critical and important work of career and technical education. So I ask that you send your own letter. No markup should move while this administration can't tell you what this has actually cost our nation in terms of dollars and an impact on CTE programs. And then second, vote no in committee markup tomorrow. Make every member say on the record whether Congress's power of the purse is real. And third, I ask that you protect what remains in statute. Amidst the chaos of the disruptions to funding that we've seen over the past year and a half, the arbitrary and capricious cancellation of grants, the opaque state waiver process that is resulting in much ado about nothing, I urge Congress to preserve and expand the appropriations language barring these transfers and extend it to every core function of the Department of Education. Because in conclusion, CTE is one of the last truly bipartisan priorities in federal education policy. Don't let it be dismembered by a reorganization that nobody asked for, no one authorized, and no one can afford. A single unified system for career and technical education housed in a department dedicated to education saves taxpayer dollars and produces better results for our students. And it's time to bring it back. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I was on early in my state Senate career, I was appointed to a job training CTE committee, and they kept talking about the importance of making sure that it wasn't an alternative education. It was an alternative forum to learn the basics education, that if you didn't learn the basics, when you got out, you would be at a severe disadvantage. And we also didn't want to track people into one opportunity and not the array of different opportunities students have by putting them in a track that they couldn't get out of. And
Absolutely.
So I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, sir.
Senior Advisor for the Center on Education and Labor at New America, Braden Goetz. Did I pronounce it right?
Gets.
Thank you. It's the Goetz.
Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today why adult education belongs in the Department of Education and why the interagency agreement with the Department of Labor is so harmful. As Ranking Member Scott said, my name is Braden Getz. I'm a senior policy advisor in the Center on Education and Labor at the nonpartisan nonprofit think tank New America. But before I joined New America, I worked for 26 years at the department, primarily in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. And my remarks are chiefly from that perspective. Congress created the adult education program in 1964 because it recognized that millions of people in the U.S. needed a high school diploma, strong foundational skills, and English proficiency to build better lives. That need continues. According to the Census Bureau, 10% of adults ages 25 and older do not have a high school diploma or its equivalent. Adult education is WIOA's largest program, serving 1.3 million students last year. About half are in English literacy programs, 30% are in programs for students with below ninth grade skills, and 20% are in high school equivalency programs. School districts comprise 47% of adult education providers, and another 30% are colleges and universities. In 38 states, the program is run by the state K-12 or higher education agency. Adult education is, at its core, an education program delivered by educators. Now, Congress made it clear it expected close collaboration between Ed and DOL in implementing WIOA, and we tried hard to achieve that. Teams with representatives from each program met often to plan and make decisions together. Program leaders met monthly, for example, and the team working on accountability met weekly. We wrote joint regulations and guidance together. DOL helped us access labor market information while we created a website that offered access to county-level estimates of adult literacy proficiency to help workforce boards in their planning. Collaboration can always be deepened, of course, but we worked as one team, and we didn't need to sit in the same agency to do that. Now, that coordination and the insights we gained from DOL were useful, but to be successful in helping students achieve their goals, adult education needs expertise in education that only a home in ed can provide. Our staff had extensive education backgrounds of their own, but the wisdom and experience of colleagues elsewhere in ed made adult education stronger still. For example, when we designed professional development to improve reading instruction, we were able to consult experts in scientifically based reading instruction from other ed offices. Colleagues working on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Rehabilitation Act helped us get smarter about serving students with disabilities. TRIO staff contributed expertise on college access strategies to help us strengthen pathways to higher education. And we collaborated with the Office of Educational Technology on digital literacy. We'd have been lost if we were in DOL. The Office of Personnel Management classifies federal employees who have teaching experience or other expertise in education as education program specialists. Even after last year's layoffs, in May, Ed still had 168 education program specialists. At DOL, out of 11,029 employees, there was only one. DOL just doesn't have the institutional know-how to run education programs. The IAA has been disastrous for adult education. Ed and DOL stopped creating professional development and technical assistance resources for adult educators and diverted those funds into the Connecting Talent to Opportunity Challenge to promote what Ed and DOL call talent marketplaces. The monitoring teams, the technical assistance team, they're gone. States that once looked to the department for help in improving their programs have no one to call. 2 program directors have left under this arrangement. Students in adult education classrooms need us to get this right. They're taking time away from work and their families because they want a better life. To make those minutes count, to help them achieve their goals, we must ensure their teachers have the support of an agency of experts in education, not one improvising its way through an unfamiliar mission. For the students, the IAA must end. Thank you.
Thank you. And could you state your last name again?
Gets.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Diane Schultz is Vice President of Public Policy for the Council on Opportunity in Education.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially with the Education and Workforce, formerly Labor Committee, Mr. Scott. At COE, we advocate on behalf of all of the federal TRIO programs. The first TRIO program, Upward Bound, was also created in 1964, like Adult Ed, by Lyndon Johnson, and then was followed by a series of other programs that were designed to help students with college access and support. TRIO has been a success over the 60 years that we've had over 6 million graduates from college. There are currently 817,000 students receiving TRIO services in all 50 states, in a total of 3,400 programs. And these programs are in rural, suburban, and urban areas. They provide individual counseling, they provide advising to students, supportive students, they assist them. And again, the focus of TRIO programs in the statute is on low-income, first-generation students and students with disabilities. The students have been severely harmed by everything that's been going on in this administration. This is the second year in a row that the administration zeroed out all funding for the federal TRIO programs. Fortunately, because of strong bipartisan support, we were able to sustain funding in FY26, and most recently last month, the House Appropriations Committee not only sustained funding, but they also increased funding by $6 million to show the strong bipartisan congressional support for these programs. These programs work. They've been effective. Last year, over the summer, for the first time, grants that have been part of a 5-year cycle started getting canceled by the department. By the middle of September, there were 128 grants that served 41,000 students, and the amount that Congress provided for those grants was $45 million. That was already in the Treasury to provide services to these students at their programs. The reasons for these cancellations did not comport with the Administrative Procedures Act, the TRIO law, or other federal laws at all. They were rather specious arguments that were given. Your program no longer comports with the priorities of this administration. Or in some instances, a program had actually been housed in a DEI unit at a university. The programs were canceled, and what happened was that at colleges and universities, if your grant isn't received on time, the staff start getting pink slips a month before the program ends. All of the TRIO grants ended August 31st of last year. People started getting pink slips. Some programs shut down entirely because they said, we don't have the money to keep the TRIO program going without the money that we receive as part of our grant. Other people just left because they said, I have to provide for my family. Some people were able to be absorbed into the other divisions of their college or university. But as a result of this, COE filed a lawsuit against the Department of Education on behalf of the 128 programs that had been canceled, we believed illegally, by the department. We were in federal district court. The judge agreed with us and granted a preliminary injunction. As a result of that, all of the original 9 programs that were the original plaintiffs have been reinstated in terms of their funding, that there are a total of an additional 24 programs that have been canceled, that have been reinstated, but we're still waiting to hear the results for 33 other programs. So the problem with this is that students don't get services, and they need these services in order to be successful. There was a new grant competition for 2 TRIO programs that closed in May. For the first time in the history of the TRIO programs, the emphasis, the priority of the department was that these were to become workforce development and training programs. No longer were they to be college access and education support programs. Obviously, this has caused quite a stir in the department. And I just want to say, it is not as if when people are getting counseling, they're not exposed to CEA options as well. If somebody wants to get an apprenticeship in a specific piece, then the counselors will assist them to do that. If someone wants to go to a community college, they will help them with their better FAFSA and help them with financial aid and help them succeed. If someone is actually in a college program, our student support services assist them as they look ahead, help them plan what courses they need, and look to their future. So the Department of Education clearly has no interest in serving low-income first-generation students. And frankly, last year at testimony before the House Appropriations Committee called us a woke peace program that was no longer needed, and that they believed that the federal government had no role in these activities and that they should be done by the colleges and universities. So we appreciate all the support that we have gotten from all of you as we continue to proceed and work through these additional grant competitions and the lawsuits. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I thank all the witnesses for testifying. If there are questions for people who are online, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll pose those questions. But in the meanwhile, Ms. Gittleman, as the people move, does their union membership move with them?
It's a great question, Ranking Member Scott. As of right now, no. So around 150 staff members have been detailed to various different agencies. So far, we're tracking details to every one of the agencies that I mentioned other than the State Department. The department is focused on hiding under the guise of a detail, which is like an interagency agreement, a normal government tool that is used to gain expertise from various different agencies, share information across agencies. These are not details at the end of the day. They are being extended into perpetuity. The most recent detail that was just started is elementary and secondary education, which when announced, staff management said that the detail would be extended at the discretion of the partner agency. All of this is also happening while we are moving headquarters to 500 D Street. There is knowingly not enough space for the entire department, even in its smaller size at 500 D Street. And all of the detailees, they have lost their spots, their spaces at Ed headquarters as well. So yes, they are still our members. We are still fighting for them. That does not necessarily mean that the agency is respecting or following their union rights. They refuse to bargain or notice us properly around any of these interagency agreements. And again, they are just hiding under the guise of the fact or what they're calling a detail.
Thank you. Ms. Lloyd, you've expressed concerns about the committee passing a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act bill that codified the transfer of the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education to labor. And we appreciate that because we obviously had the same concerns. Could you provide recommendations for improving the collaboration between education and labor to better serve students and adult learners, and anything else you can say to improve the efficiency? And how do the IAA agreements address any of those concerns?
Absolutely. Thank you for the good question. And as Braden spoke to in his remarks, OCTAE and Employment and Training Administration, ETA, at the Department of Labor work in close partnership. I am not saying that career and technical education and adult education should not be aligned with and connected with the workforce developments at the Department of Labor. And when I was in office, I worked in close partnership with my DOL counterparts. And yes, we absolutely need better alignment between our education and workforce systems as a nation. Education, workforce development, and economic development are all interdependent and connected, but they are not synonymous. They are not one and the same and interchangeable. And so I think about how we strengthen collaboration, how we break down silos at the federal, state, and local levels, how we align credentials and identify, what are the not just in demand, but truly high quality credentials that will lead people to increased opportunity, increased economic and social mobility, not just get a short-term job, but not have a next step for lifelong learning and career advancement. How do we think about how we co-invest in talent development across the board? And when I was at the department, we did things like we co-issued guidance between the Department of Education and the Department of Labor, doing things like crosswalking career and technical education with registered apprenticeship programs and seeking stronger alignment between those two. We issued shared guidance on a number of issues, and having consistency and connection and clarity matters, but saying, oh, education is just workforce is a false construct. And one that I think ultimately will be harmful. And so I think about the people that the Department of Labor is designed to serve, and how critical the work is for helping dislocated workers get back to work as quickly as possible, or helping our young people who are ages 14 to 24, not fifth grade through the first 2 years of post-secondary, but those young people who are not in school and not employed have some connection back to job training and economic opportunity. Like the individuals with the most barriers to employment in our nation need and deserve a focused Department of Labor. And the Department of Labor does not have the expertise, as Rachel spoke to very clearly, and did Braden, that they need to truly administer career and technical education, adult education that sits in our nation's schools and colleges and state agencies of education. And so yes, I want more collaboration, more partnership, but I do not want one to replace the other. I think about education as a springboard to endless opportunities, and it's not a workforce pipeline that is ultimately just designed to fill this quarter's vacancies. Like they're different agencies with different missions and purposes that should be stronger in their connections, but should not be synonymous.
Well, thank you. The administration says that they've eased the burden. We have a question that says, what have you heard from states and school districts about whether OCTAE, the interagency agreement, has eased administrative burdens? What have you heard from cities, from states and school districts?
I mean, as I shared in the infographic, like one of the challenges is that the Department of Education itself has reported that OCTAE, since it has been transferred, its functions have been transferred to the Department of Labor, has received almost 5,000 payment requests to labor. And these are, part of DOGE's Defend the Spend effort that requires written justification for each drawdown, even for, not just discretionary grants, but also for, the allocations of formula funding. And this is a waste of time of state agencies or other grantees. And also, it's I want to say insulting, it's demeaning to have our grant recipients or formula funding recipients have to justify what Congress has already appropriated and and that we have authorized to go out to these states and grantees in the form of the grants that they are receiving. And so that alone is challenging, but some of the bumps in the road that we experienced through the IAs include things like communication has become more fragmented, timelines were compressed, coordination has been diminished. Octave is not a steady strategic partner that it once was in driving innovation in career and technical education and adult education. There's a lot of uncertainty around technical assistance. Like the bureaucracy is ultimately a tremendous challenge for states to navigate, but beyond the bureaucracy, there's like the technical challenges of issues states have faced regarding funding, bumps in the transition that have largely been resolved in some ways, but there was little notice for a huge abrupt change. The states have not been able to pull down funding due to technical issues, like the system that labor had didn't recognize bank accounts. States have had to use, as I mentioned in my remarks, like general funds to cover cash deficiencies and continue service, which ultimately like poses some insecurity to states and how they're thinking about risk in state budgets. And then they're not getting clarity from the department, from either department, labor or education, on if states are fronting funding for core programs, what does that mean on supplementing versus supplanting? Last summer, when there was an approximate $7 billion freeze, like there was a lot of closure of programs. And the Octave staff are tremendous resources and supports to the field. I cannot underestimate. I've spoken to state directors in adult education and CTE across the country since all of these changes have taken place. And again, like they've been highly complimentary of the relationships that they previously held with Octave staff. They have real-time, deeply complex knowledge and technical assistance that they provide. And there's so much concern that, because so many people have been cut, like the diminishment of experience and expertise and support is having a real impact on the quality of programs. And then there's lack of clarity around things like reporting and data collection, like the templates or trainings or technical assistance for annual reports. Or, a lot of states have new state directors that have never submitted federal reports before. And reporting requirements sometimes require state notice periods that haven't aligned up with the federal guidance that they've received or have not received from the department. And the portals have been down. And like people are just winging it as best they can based on prior experience, but not getting the ongoing support they need for the technical implementation of the really critical work that adult education and CTE provides for our country.
Well,
And
thank you. Rachel, were you saying something?
yeah, I was just going to add, in addition to what Dr. Lloyd was saying, I think it's important to note that they did this in a very logical manner, right? You'll notice that the bills that were introduced that are going to mark up tomorrow, they lack the IAAs around the Office for Civil Rights and the Office for Special Education and Rehabilitation Services. That's because they understand how much bipartisan support those offices do receive. What Amy was talking about, I think it's important to note that they began with a program, like Braden explained, that already had deep connections and roots in a systemic relationship with the Department of Labor. The funding that was administered via Department of Labor's system was a formula fund that is arguably one of the easiest and simplest formula funds to administer, as opposed to, for example, the TRIO grants, right? Which is a massive discretionary grant program that aids thousands of individual institutions. The other piece of this is they only, as Dr. Lloyd mentioned in her slide, we use a single system at the Department of Education called G5. With HHS and DOL, it's a 4-part system. And basically, for the Perkins funds, we only transitioned one part of that system. So we were only testing 1/4 or 1/2, depending on how you're looking at it, the implementation of the IAA. And even with that, there was still months of delays, and every individual drawdown had to be individually approved by the Deputy Assistant Secretary. So all this to say is there were massive issues that the administration came to honestly, but they chose Octave to start for a reason. And what we are going to see with TRIO and the rest of the discretionary grants and the rest of the formula grants is going to be even, it's hard to explain how much worse. So.
Okay. We had a question, which is reports indicate that the cost of an additional $1 million for the Department of Labor to administer career and technical adult education programs compared to the Department of Education. Does anyone have any documentation on that? And if so, what are we going to lose by spending $1 million doing the same thing? What could we do with that extra $1 million? Anybody want to comment?
Braden, do you want to jump in?
Sure. That's documented in an interagency agreement that the Department of Education signed with the Department of Labor, and we can share that with all the members of the committee. So they've admitted this is going to cost over $1 million to do. So we're paying labor to do things that our staff used to do by themselves. And what could we do with that money? Think of all the things that we could be doing and improving in hiring more staff so that we have better services for states, or investing in work-based learning. There's so many things that we need to invest our funds in, and wasting it to pay people to do something that the department can do by itself is nuts.
Thank you. I think we've got one final question, which says, when we talk about dismantling the Department of Education, we often focus on the institution on a human level. What are the people afraid of losing? What is driving families and educators in this conversation, and how can we better communicate those stakes to the public?
I can start. I think this is this is probably the hardest question we get on a day-to-day basis. And I think it actually speaks to the passion and expertise of the Department of Education staff. This administration has been on a 1.5-year long dismantling journey, and has wreaked havoc on the staff that work at the department. I talked to a member earlier this morning who had been unlawfully fired last year and is now facing foreclosure. So on a staff level, it's hard to explain just how big of an impact the last 1.5 years has had. But I think, a 1.5 years has gone by, and really the harm that we can point to is that Perkins funds were 2 to 3 months late. And that, Diane mentioned a lot of grants were canceled. Billions and billions and billions of funding and grants were canceled. But people on the ground don't necessarily see that, right? I think, I mentioned this in my comments for K-12, 13% of funding comes from a federal level. So kids on the ground are not necessarily seeing the effects of a grant getting canceled or a grant getting delayed until their student support service professional gets fired, or until their program shuts down, or until the promised doors and windows don't get funded. And a lot of that, because of the court cases, because of the people on this call, because of our staff, we've been able to kind of block the dam a little bit, right? And I think that is often, it makes it harder to explain the impact of these interagency agreements. It's not to say that there has not been harm. There are tens and tens of thousands of OCR complaints that are just sitting in a backlog waiting to be answered, right? There is plenty of harm to point to. But title funds got out the door a couple of weeks ago, seemingly without very much problems, right? And so I think we are going to start to see a shift as we continue to see these IAAs get implemented. I think we're going to start to see, because of the way that ed funds work, they're often over the course of like 3 to 5 years. Schools are, planning for, grant funding to be delayed or shut off. We're going to start to see the effects of the last 1.5 years in a way that we haven't necessarily seen yet yet today. But I think doing a lot of these events and talking to people on the ground, I honestly think that the biggest impact is to our administrators. And it's something that we have all talked about today, which is that there's no one to pick up the phone anymore, right? One of the greatest, $150 billion in funding. We do a lot at the Department of Education, but one of the greatest roles that we play, oversight, there's so many important roles, but one of the greatest roles that we play is technical assistance. It is literally having someone to pick up the phone to call when you need help with something on a state or local level. And that goes across the board in every different program that you see. And when you talk to people on the ground, it's two different things. It's that in so many instances, sure, it's 13% of the funding, but it's the bottom line of programs, right? It goes to the very core of school districts or institutions. And so when you lose funding, you're playing Jenga. You're trying to figure out how to save different programs. And then the second thing is you've lost the person on the other end of the phone. And that's partially just because of the gutting of the department. And that's partially because our staff are working, 15-hour days to try to get the funding out the door. And so they have less time to be able to answer that call. Diane.
Thank you. And Dan, were you going to say something? Before you say it, let me ask you a question. You can do two answers at the same time. Could you give us an idea of what the grant trio grantees have been saying about the change in focus?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Well, they're just shocked because that has not been the focus of TRIO programs for 60 years. So to suddenly be told that unless you write to this priority, that you now are going to become a workforce development and training program, if you don't do that, we're not going to read your grant, was totally shocking to people. But in order to apply, they had to write a grant for that. So the loss that we're talking about here is there's short term, but there's long term. The 6 million graduates of these TRIO programs are taxpayers. They've stayed in their communities. They help with the economy. They help as role models. They're leaders in government. And that's going to be lost if the TRIO programs are lost, because there is no other program that is able to assist students get into and graduate from post-secondary education like the TRIO programs. And frankly, that is why I believe the Congress put the TRIO programs in Title IV along with federal financial aid of the Higher Education Act, because the Congress understood it's not enough to give somebody money to get into school. They need support systems to help them stay there and persist and then graduate from. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you.
And if I can quickly jump in a little bit on the human aspect,
Yep.
because I think that's a really important question. And when you asked it, I was thinking, sir, that this weekend I had a dear friend from out of town come stay with me, and she's a teacher, and she was saying, Amy, I know you're doing all this stuff with the Department of Education and interagency agreements, and there's all this stuff happening on the Hill and with this administration, but day to day, I'm not feeling it. What should I be feeling or seeing? And your analogy, sir, of thinking about how ultimately we're the frog in the water with the temperature being turned up bit by bit is a very apt one, where I think about the long-term economic competitiveness. First of all, I think that education, because it's forward funding, our local districts and schools and students and families may not be feeling the immediacy of this in the same way that those who interface most directly with the department for the high quality technical assistance that Rachel was speaking to are feeling. Those are the ones who are the first to get the brunt of these unlawful and harmful decisions made through the interagency agreements. But I think about the long-term economic competitiveness for our nation and what career and technical education does, what education does writ large is to help our young people and adult learners alike, like learn about adaptability in our changing, world of work. And not a single one of us has yet mentioned artificial intelligence and AI, but, the rapid changes that are happening in the world of work mean that young people today are going to change jobs 15 to 20 times over their lifetime across 5 to 8 different industry sectors. And so critical thinking is really critical, not just task completion and getting things done, being a cog in the wheel, but thinking about the durable skills that our students and learners of all ages need to navigate the complexity of our world and have curiosity and engagement with AI and leading edge technologies and help to shape their usage, not just be passive subjects to them. And thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship, all these things that matter in education. And as we see the prevailing narrative of merging the missions of workforce development and education, we see states and local stakeholders that are already kind of reacting to the federal messaging, what's in the air, the national mindset and narrative of education for workforce, and moving CTE away from an integrated college and career pathways approach to really thinking about CTE as how do we train students for specific jobs, for specific employer demand in a specific moment. And I think the downstream effect of the decisions our policymakers and our system level leaders are making now in response to things like, last year, the president's budget proposal included eliminating all of post-secondary funding for CTE because Workforce Pell would take care of it, which are short-term credentials that ultimately the vast majority of which leave people no better off than when they started. And also it serves those with a baccalaureate or an associate's degree far better than it does a high school student. So I'm not going to hang high hopes on short-term credentials and Workforce Pell for our high school kids to have lives of choice and thriving. We know good jobs today and into the future require some form of post-secondary education, and the majority of good jobs will require still a bachelor's degree. We don't talk about this enough as a nation, the importance of higher education in driving our economy and in opening doors to opportunity. And then states have also expressed a lot of concern about this administration not understanding the full complexity of career and technical education or adult education, and thinking about the intersectionality of how we implement these programs in partnership with IDEA and ADA integration, or thinking about adolescent development and human development and accountability to educational outcomes and student agency and support. Ultimately, I worry that this prevailing narrative of, oh, let's just have kids get a job is going to result in, of course, diminished opportunities for young people's lifelong trajectories, but diminished ability for our nation to continue to thrive and grow. And so I think, the downstream effects are coming. And I'm already seeing kind of these waves of change happen in how CTE programs are being envisioned. Everybody wants greater systems alignment, but I think, there's a lot more caution in the system, a lot less innovation, a lot less professional development. And we're reverting back to, a CTE system that is very technical and linear instead of really focused on young people's lifelong development.
Okay. Well, thank you. Any other fun comments? If not, yeah. Mr. Gates?
I would just say that you have to remember that a lot of the young people and adults served by these programs don't have loud voices today. And they're really counting on members of Congress to step up and be the voices for them. And we thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And we're going to do the best we can. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today and making sure we're shining a light at what's truly at stake. What we've heard today reinforces what we've been saying, that adult education is not an afterthought in our in our education system. It's a lifeline for millions of Americans, working parents trying to gain new skills, veterans transitioning to civilian life, immigrants learning English, displaced workers adapting to economic change, and adults pursuing a second chance through education. These programs succeed because they are grounded in a broader educational mission. They're about literacy, numeracy, civic participation, and lifelong learning, not just filling the next job opening. And that's why Congress placed adult education and family literacy programs in the Department of Education in the first place. That's why efforts to move them as part of a broader campaign to fulfill a campaign promise to dismantle the Department of Education should be of concern to all of us, regardless of party, and we should be focused on strengthening programs, expanding access, and building on the bipartisan progress the committee has achieved last Congress, not using adult learners as part of an ideological effort to hollow out public education. It goes even more true for programs like TRIO. Congress crafted these programs in a particular way, and since their inception, since they have a core mission of expanding college access, not workforce development, this is the reason the Congress placed the administration at the Department of Education. And in the end of the day, the debate should be about whether we see education as a public good that creates long-term opportunity or simply a short-term workforce pipeline. And so we're going to be doing the best we can tomorrow, and appreciate everybody being with us today. And particularly want to thank all of the participants who are online with us today. So thank you so much. This will end the program, and look forward to seeing you, some of you tomorrow, but we're going to be continuing the fight to make sure that people get the proper education and the programs have the proper focus. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.